Let's kick it off. My name's Steve, and along with us, the Manchester United supporter, and Cabs, the Liverpool supporter, we're delighted to be joined by Kieran Maguire, the leading football finance expert in the country, a lecturer, author, presenter of Price of Football podcast, which is brilliant. Kieran, tell us how you became the leading football finance expert in the country.
Like most things in life, purely by accident. I've been teaching since the 1980s, so it's a long time, and I love being a teacher. But the money's rubbish, so I moonlight. And I moonlight on Wall Street in Canary Wharf. In 2005, I'm down in Canary Wharf delivering a course for an investment bank. Go out to lunch, come back about half an hour later, and he's sort of about half past 1 UK time. And he's 2-3 huge bouncers on the door, and they've put shutters across the windows. I'm thinking, what's going on here? So I go in and say to my class, well, what's happening outside? And they say, well, we can tell you now. We've been working on this deal. One of our clients, the Glazer family, is about to take over Manchester United Football Club. And we're a bit concerned that a bunch of Cockney Reds are going to put the windows out and try to storm the building because they won't like what they're going to hear. And I go, okay, right. And we talk about the deal, and that was it. I just forgot about it. And that evening, I was going back to Manchester. I mean, all my life, I've lived in Manchester for 40 years. So I was going back to Manchester. BBC phoned the university and say, can somebody explain this? And my boss knows that I use football as a way of teaching traditional finance to undergraduates because it's something that you can engage young people with. Where, yeah, if I start talking about a chemicals company or Vodafone, who cares? If you talk about Manchester United, Liverpool, especially in these two titan cities. So I get the call from BBC, can you come into the breakfast show on BBC One tomorrow morning? I go, yeah, love it. I'm there sort of waving at my mum, the usual stuff going around. And I must have done okay. I keep it simple. You know what my teaching style's like. I don't like to overcomplicate things. So the next time a football finance story comes in, because I didn't make a fool of myself the first time, you go on to somebody's phone as a contact and you build up a portfolio of work from there. So now I probably do around about 800 interviews over the course of a year. And Liverpool University, they sort of heard on the grapevine that I seemed to do okay at teaching, and so they headhunted me to come across to Liverpool. When effectively sold it, you'll be able to go and teach dedicated football finance courses, is which I do nearly all of the time these days. It's a pure lucky accident. I'm one of the few people, I would imagine, that's benefited from the Glazers.
Wow. I didn't even know that. And obviously, Kieran, I should mention the only reason I know you personally is because you lectured me at the University of Liverpool. So I don't think I've ever heard that backstory before. So it's actually fascinating to know it all started with the Glazers.
Yes.
Let's get straight into the nitty gritty stuff then. So can you please explain FFP and PSR, which we're hearing constantly in the headlines of football? So please explain in layman terms what FFP and PSR are.
Well, first of all, they are the same thing. It's just a profitability and sustainability rules are a new description of financial fair play. And the reason for that is that financial fair play wasn't fair, and profitability and sustainability rules encourage neither profitability nor sustainability. So they're both ridiculous statements. But the way that it works is as follows. You assessed football clubs in the Premier League on a rolling 3-year period, and they're allowed to lose £105 million over that 3 years. And in the Championship, you're allowed to do exactly the same, but you're only allowed to lose £39 million. And the clubs which are being relegated and promoted, they get sort of step-ups and step-downs between those two figures. So what is a loss? A loss is the difference between your revenues, which is effectively the money that a football club generates from ticket sales, from TV money, sponsorship deals, and player sales. Player sales become important, as we know. And then you've got the cost of the running a club. As people aren't naive, they listen to this show, and anybody who's a football fan, the main costs of a football club are talent related. So you've got the wages of staff, which are highly incentivized towards doing well. And then you've got the way that we treat where you spread those over the life of the contract. And that would normally take up, 70, 80%, if not more, of your total cost. So you compare those two, and provided you're not losing £105 million or more than £105 million over 3 years, you're fine. But this is where it gets slightly more complicated. If you spend money on infrastructure, not a problem for the Glazers because they never did, or Mike Ashley. But you think about what Spurs have done. So if you spend money on infrastructure, that's ignored. If you spend money on your women's team, that's ignored. If you spend money on your academy, that's ignored. If you spend money on a community scheme, and some of the football club community schemes, I've seen evidence of them in the Northwest, Manchester United, City, Liverpool, Everton, Tranmere, all of these clubs, absolutely fantastic. Those costs are ignored. So you do these costs and you mess around. And if you get less than £105 million, everything's okay. And if it's more than £105 million, you go before a commission. And as we saw in the cases of Nottingham Forest and Everton last year, the biggest sanction is going to be one which affects things on the pitch, which is the points deduction.
That's quite an incendiary. I'm curious, Kieran. You seem to be, and when your initial statement, like against or having some negative sentiments towards them. I'm going to confess, as someone who's quite pro generally, the idea of regulation and FFP PSR. The reason is, I look at. I don't think for me, football isn't like a normal business. You have a league system, so you can't have clubs going bankrupt. And then secondly, as some know, I've seen in the old days of football clubs going bust, leaving people in the community without payment, St. John's Ambulance, local businesses. So for me, regulation is something that does need to exist because football historically was not well run. What do you see as that kind of, why are you skeptical about these rules? Or I'm assuming you are based on what you've just said. You can correct me if I'm.
I don't like the present set of rules because we still have clubs going into insolvency events. We still have local suppliers not being paid. We still have staff not being paid. We still have huge uncertainties about the future of individual clubs. The rules as they presently stand discourage a level playing field. They discourage ambition. They discourage aspirational owners. They discourage investment. I am in favour of some form of regulation. Regulations which actually secure the future of the game, as opposed to the rules that we have at present, which were specifically designed not to reduce insolvency, but instead to preserve the status quo in terms of those clubs which are winning trophies and those clubs that are, for want of a better phrase, the middle classes. If we go back, I'm old enough to remember the inception of the Premier League. And yes, Blackburn shone brightly and shortly until Jack Walker's money ran out. And then it was Manchester United usually and Arsenal now and then. And actually, it was a bit boring. Now, I appreciate as a Manchester United fan, you look at it through a different lens, but for anybody that didn't have a dog in the fight, it was, how many points are United going to win the Premier League by this season? It was actually fairly tedious, despite what the media would have you believe otherwise. Then Abramovich came along and he started lobbing £50 notes into the equation where previously people had been lobbing £20 notes. So he created a new benchmark and we had a new challenger club. Where he got his money from, Chelsea fans don't care. Then Manchester City came along with Sheikh Mansour, did exactly the same as Chelsea. And all of a sudden, now we've got 4 clubs, potentially. Liverpool have done it organically, and I think Liverpool deserve a huge amount of credit for that. Newcastle and Aston Villa would like to join that club, but they are prevented from doing so. Is Saudi Arabia going to go bust? I don't think. If Saudi Arabia does go bust, we've got bigger problems in life than football. If we take a look at the Aston Villa owners, Naz Sawiris, I think, is the richest man from Egypt. Wes Edens is a billionaire in his own right. So Aston Villa have got the money. Spurs, again, they deserve credit. They've done it organically, but they've not actually won anything. It has to be remembered. And there's nothing better than reminding a Spurs fan of that, of course. So we do have a system where trophies were being shared out between 4 or 5 clubs. And what the status quo don't like, what the elite don't like, is somebody joining their gang. Chelsea was one they didn't like. Manchester City was 2 they didn't like. So the rules are there to prevent another Manchester City or another Chelsea. If we had a set of rules which said Newcastle United can spend as much money as Manchester City or Chelsea or Manchester United, but not more than, I'd say that's great. But at present, they can spend less than half the money of those clubs. And to me, that's not really encouraging competitive balance. It's allowing Manchester City and Chelsea to be where they are due to historical anomalies rather than being better clubs, for want of a better word. And I've got sympathies towards Abramovich. There's things I can say off air, which I'm not prepared to say on it, but he's done a lot in terms of there's a very distasteful element to the Chelsea fan base, and I think he's tried to improve things there. I lived in Manchester for 40 years. I've seen the transformation that Mansour and Abu Dhabi money has made to the eastern side of Manchester, and that has been beneficial. There are pluses and minuses for these new people coming in, and the same could potentially be true in Birmingham and Newcastle, but the PSR rules don't allow it.
Yeah. So yes, okay, I understand. So competitive balance is the thing that you're concerned about. I guess two ways of solving that, and I'd like to hear your opinion on that. One, in the kind of US sport or stroke Formula One model, they have the cost cap, right? Stroke wage cap. So that's one potential way of doing it. And that probably is something owners would be in favour of, given the amount of money that goes out in wages. And the other option, based on what you're saying, would be, like you said, maybe capping equity or owner investment at maybe at the limit of the top club. So Newcastle could put the money in at the level of revenue to match the Manchester United. In the way it currently is, I know like associated party transactions are like limited at market rate, right? And you would argue Newcastle isn't as big as a club. Those are two ideas. Are they two you would agree with, or do you have any other suggestions? If you were to change the current rules, like, how would you go about it?
I'd perhaps encourage two things. I do agree with you that having some form of spending cap is probably for the benefit of the game, because otherwise what happens if Elon Musk decides that he suddenly realised he likes football all his life, and as the world's richest person decides to go and buy the 15 of the world's best players in order to have a personal fiefdom, a personal toy. Now, he's already got that because he's in the form of the United States government, but I think that's for a separate podcast. What we do need is some form of checks and balances. So here's a couple of suggestions. First of all, I agree with a salary cap, similar to what we have in NFL and NBA. We've got to set it at a relatively high level, because unlike American franchise sports, there is somewhere else to go. If the NFL has the cap, and if a player says, well, actually, I want more than is being offered by the Chiefs or the Bruins or whatever it's going to be, or the Jets, I'm not really up on American franchise sports. They can't go to Europe because there isn't the equivalent. Probably not a good idea to go to Canada or Mexico at present. There are no alternatives. Whereas if we take a look at what's happened when we've had wage caps introduced in rugby, for example, English rugby players went to go and play in France. They went to play in South Africa. They went to play in New Zealand instead. So I think it wouldn't work in football unless there's some form of either European agreement, and we do have some European cost controls under UEFA, or you set a wage level which is competitive with that of the best clubs in Europe, in which case you're not going to be disadvantaged. So that's one option. The other concern is, well, hold on, some of these clubs could be running up huge losses. So therefore, what you have to say, if you're going to budget for losses, then the owner has to put in 2 years' worth of losses into a central fund. If the owner's personal circumstances change, then you've got 2 years to sort out the club. If the owner decides that they don't like football, well, then they've effectively got a penalty for walking away. And that means that we don't end up in the insolvency situations. And the third thing, which I've sometimes suggested, is having a transfer tax. And again, you effectively have a form of transfer cap. And if you do want to go and sign some of the best players in the world, okay, it's a transfer tax. It's set at 500%. So if you want to go and sign a player for £100 million, £500 million goes into a pot. 75% of that gets split between the other Premier League clubs. 25% goes to the EFL. Even if you're one of the world's richest people, you're thinking, that's a lot of money I'm committing myself to pay for. So if you want to do it, well, fine, but money's going to other clubs as well, which means that your opportunity to get ahead is restricted. And secondly, it's a pretty punitive tax, so only the crazy people would do it. And football's full of crazy people, by the way, but that's again for a separate podcast.
I like those ideas. I think you sound a bit like Trump with his tariffs, 500%. But it's pretty smart.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting to hear your views on FFP, Kieran. I think towards the end of this pod, we will actually talk about how we're going to fix football for the future of all the fans out there. But I think we'd like to get into some specific cases. So we've kind of talked about what FFP is. So we have to start with obviously the biggest club in the country, Manchester United, even though we're in the bottom half of the table. But I think it's obviously an interesting subject because this is a club that came out themselves a few weeks ago, issued a letter to their own fan base saying that, we're potentially risking breaching this regulation around obviously increasing ticket pricing. So will you just give us an overview of the current situation for Manchester United with regards to FFP?
Manchester United are close to the limit of FFP. The reason why Manchester United are in the position that they are, when I teach at management school, as you know, Steve, and the way that it works is that you look at a business and why are some businesses more successful than others and why do some businesses underperform? It actually, in my view, comes down to three things. First of all, it comes down to opportunities. Well, Manchester United's in a football-mad city, in a football-mad country. It's in a city with a large population. It's in a city where it's got the largest stadium in the country. So in terms of opportunities, and it's in the Premier League, it's in European football, lots of positive things in terms of opportunities. Secondly, it comes to resources. Financial resources, it's listed on the New York Stock Exchange, so it's got access to capital markets. It's got human resources because it's Manchester United. It's able to attract kids who want to go and join the academy. It's able to attract players from other clubs because it's Manchester United and it's got the history and the heritage and everything that goes towards that club. So it's got the resources of the Premier League, which is the most successful football product on the planet. And it's got a global fan base and it's got global sponsorship interests as well. So that's 2 out of the 3 items. The third thing, which makes a business successful or unsuccessful, is the quality of senior management and their decisions. And here, I'd say, I can give Manchester United an A for opportunities. I can give Manchester United an A for resources, D- for senior management decisions. You've only got to look. And why have Manchester United unable to spend as much money as they want? Well, first of all, there is a mindset, and this isn't a criticism of Manchester United fans any more than other fans, because the most common question is, why can't we spend more money? But the reason is because you've spent money poorly historically. So, Jadon Sancho, 70 million, Anthony, 80 million, Casemiro, Harry Maguire, the goalkeeper, the centre forwards, Mason Mount. Yeah, that's for Donny van der Beek. That's £500 million.
The list goes on, yeah.
Yeah, the list does go on. Yeah, I appreciate this is not a football show, but over the course of the last decade, with the exception of Bruno Fernandes, are there any players that you can say Manchester United have signed? That was a brilliant piece of work by the recruitment team. There's some which have done okay, but there's been an awful lot of duds. So the reason why Manchester United are in the position that they are today is A, they've spent money poorly, and they've given players contracts, which means that the players don't want to walk away from that contracts. And I don't blame the players for doing so. If another university comes along to me and offers me $300,000 a week for teaching, I'm going to take it. And then if I turn out to be a rubbish teacher, but I've signed a 5-year contract to go and teach there, I'm going to stick there and deliver my mediocre football finance lectures because I can. I've got a piece of paper. So I don't blame the players in the least. It comes down to the quality of decision making. Can that all be put at the hands of the Glazers? Well, a fair amount of it can, because they appointed the chief executives. So what did they do? Manchester United won trophies when David Gill was in charge. David Gill doesn't get the credit he deserves. They then transferred to Ed Woodward. Well, who was Woodward? Ed Woodward was a chartered accountant who went into investment banking. And that didn't work out particularly well, so they replaced him with Richard Arnold. Who was Richard Arnold? A chartered accountant who went into investment banking. Both were at Bristol University. Well, yeah, if that's not a really duff decision, what is? So I think the Glazers, they deserve a huge amount of stick. But my concern is things haven't got any better. Because what did the new owners do? They came in, they said, right, we needed a person in charge of football. So they spent a load of money recruiting Dan Ashworth. When they realised that Dan Ashworth was a people person and Ineos are not people, they have got no understanding of human psychology. They realised, who is this bloke that's standing up for staff? So they sacked him. But in the meantime, they'd spent £219 million in the 24-25 summer window Now, I appreciate that Dan Ashworth isn't the transfer guru, but he certainly has, he has a say in those transactions. So Manchester United have ended up where they are due to poor quality senior management. And you cannot stress the importance of good quality management. I know a guy who, ironically, owns a football club, and he used to be one of the directors of Blockbuster. And he was given an opportunity to buy into this business. Blockbuster had an opportunity to buy this business called Netflix. And he said, Netflix never work. Who's going to want to stream stuff when they can come into one of our stores and then get a DVD and then 3 days later have to go, oh, Jesus Christ, I've got to go and take it back. No, that's not going to work. We're going to stick with Blockbuster. Netflix is going to fail. Quality of management.
This is music to my ears, Kieran, I have to say. The reason me and us have got big smiles on our faces is we are actually a football podcast, although we dip into finance, we dip into politics, music, whatever, we're not going to pigeonhole ourselves. But myself and us, we've had heated debates over the last year, 2 years about Ineos in particular. As you know, Kieran, the takeover saga between Ineos and Qatar, went on for about a year. The fan base became pretty split in terms of what they preferred, a state-backed ownership of Qatar or Ineos, which was, Jim Ratcliffe, the supposed Manchester United fan, born and bred in Manchester, understands the fans, all of that stuff. So, yeah, we've had many a heated debate over the last years.
Is that the same Jim Ratcliffe who was the Chelsea season ticket holder who tried to buy Chelsea from the government 3.5 years ago?
That's the one, yeah.
That's the same one, yeah.
But no, it's very interesting you mentioned the quality of decision-making, because obviously that impacts the financials. So Manchester United, look, we know we're in a mess, not just financially, but look at the league table, right? So, yeah, like you said, Kieran, many of these, the situation, many of these decisions were made by the Glazers. United fans, we were desperate for the Glazers out. Jim did the deal to keep the Glazers in. So looking at where we are now, tell us about what Manchester United can do. So, for example, in this January transfer window, there's been a lot of talk about Garnacho to Chelsea, for example. So, the fee that there was talked about was in the region of 50 million to 60 million. He's a homegrown player. So tell us about, this pure profit terminology that is used and how that can impact your transfer budget.
Well, when we started the discussion on the cost control rules, I said that they were profit-based, and we've got these three main areas of revenue, which are ticket sales, broadcast, and commercial. But you add to that the profit on player sales. Now, what is profit? Profit is the difference between your sale price and your book value. So if I sign a player for £50 million on a 5-year contract, we've got this thing called amortization, which means that each year the value of the player in the balance sheet goes down by 10 million. So after 2 years, 50 minus 10 minus 10, after 2 years, the player has got a book value of 30 million. So if you sell him for 35, you get 35 million in cash at some point in time, but you make a book profit of 5 million. That goes into your PSR calculations. When it comes to an academy player, how much did Liverpool pay for Trent Alexander-Arnold's registration? How much did Manchester United pay for Marcus Rashford's or Garnacho? How much did Spurs play for Harry Kane? How much did City play for Phil Foden or Cole Palmer? They paid nothing. So therefore, if I sell that player for 35 million, it's 35 minus my cost of 0. So you get this profit. So we saw in the June 2024 summer window, because most football clubs have a financial year end of the 30th of June. And when you sell a player, 100% of that profit is taken immediately. So when you buy a player, the cost is spread over the life of the contract. When you sell a player, all of the profit, the clubs suddenly realised, and it was, for someone like me who's been teaching this nonsense for years and going, why is it taking you so long to cotton on? You can see these slow light bulbs going on. We need to do something. He's not bad. He's not the best player we've got necessarily, but if we can sell him for 30 million, that digs us out a 30 million hole as far as PSR cap is concerned, and therefore we won't be on a charge and we won't get a points deduction.
Okay, so is it fair to say that, for example, if you sold Garnacho for 50 million this January transfer window, I've seen a lot of tweets basically that there's like this 3 times multiplier on homegrown talent. Is that a decent benchmark? I know it depends on contract length, etc., but is that a decent benchmark to say that a homegrown sale of 50 million could potentially enable 150 million pounds worth of spend in that same window?
If not more, because if I spend 250 million pounds and I've signed players on 5-year contracts, it's 50 million pounds a year. So you got 50 million profit from Garnacho. I've got a 50 million pound cost in a calendar year, but we've only got 6 months worth of a calendar year to worry about till the 30th of June. So actually, 50 million going out, 25 million coming in as a cost. You've got some more player wages potentially, but that'll absorb the other 25. So yeah, you can. What it does mean, of course, is that you've got to do another sale next year, but it's called player trading, and trading involves selling as well as buying. I don't see many Manchester United fans in tears because they sold Scott McTominay and Mason Greenwood last summer. Yeah, and Greenwood's, I think he's the leading scorer in French League One, whatever it is. McTominay's done well at Napoli as well. Both homegrown players, Manchester United booked 40 to 50 million of profit there.
Yeah, it's part of what you discussed in terms of the management. There was a massive underinvestment in the youth academy under Woodward. There's two things. There's that, and also there is a certain element of we have a certain mentality of we're developing these players to play in the first team and not trade them. Especially in the fan base, there's this psychology that we have of there was a whole thing of we just don't want to sell Garnacho, and I think him being an academy product, and we have this history of having one academy player in the squad. I think it's going on, for 90 odd years. So there is a psychology, but you're right. When you talked about when the Abu Dhabi takeover happened, one thing they did really well, and again, outside of PSR, right, I think youth kind of investment, they built a fantastic youth setup, invested in it massively, and now it's paying them back, and then you get that revenue back that you can spend on the first team. So
we've seen that big style in Manchester because you've got former Manchester United players whose kids are at Manchester City's academy, and what Manchester City do is that for their best academy players, they are sent to St Bede's school in Manchester. Okay, the fees there 18, 20 grand a year, be higher this year with VAT, but I think City can possibly afford it. And all of a sudden, if I'm a parent, I'm going, well, yeah, Manchester United's a bigger brand, but City are offering a much more comprehensive service. I mean, United have tried to fight back by sending some of their kids to Manchester Grammar School. But I've also heard, as part of the cutbacks instigated by Ineos, and these are they say, well, it's a really smart saving. United, what they used to do was send some of their coaches to these schools, and they just do a couple of training sessions with the kids who are at the school. And okay, the kids might not be good enough to get into Manchester United Academy, but they go back and tell their mum and dad, and if you can afford to send your kids to Manchester Grammar School, you're not skint. We've had 2 Manchester United coaches in today. It could be that their mum or their dad is involved in marketing or is involved in commercial deals, and they go, that's really good. It's kids working in the community. It's educational. We've got a commercial budget. We weren't quite sure where to spend it, but I'm now veering towards United. Well, all of that has now gone out the window. So it's short-term cost cutting instigated by Ineos. I got a load of flack. I went on to another Manchester United, I appreciate not a Manchester United podcast, but I went on to a Manchester United podcast called The Stretford Paddock a few weeks ago. And I said that in many ways, Ineos are worse than the Glazers because they are Glazer enablers. They have allowed the Glazers to get away with all of the stuff that's taking place. And because it's offshore Jim and his merry men, the view is that it must be okay and things become very tribal. I don't like the Glazers and I don't like Ineos, but Glazers aren't Ineos enablers.
Yeah, that's fascinating, Kieran, because that clip, I did watch that podcast, and that clip actually made it into our group chat and sparked a big debate about whether the Glazers are or not worse than Ineos. So, yeah, I mean, just wrap up on Manchester United before we come on to Liverpool. Just in terms of the debt, so the Glazers, when they bought Manchester United, it was a highly leveraged takeover. They piled the debt onto the club, right? And the club have been carrying this debt and paying huge interest costs over the year. which is clearly not helping that FFP situation. I think actually you might have tweeted a few weeks ago when United released a letter and they referenced £300 million loss. And I think you actually mentioned that part of that loss was a big amount of interest payment. So talk to us about debt at football clubs and, how this can impact FFP and, specifically of United. What is the impact of this debt on the club?
First of all, there is nothing wrong with debt. Somebody that's worked in the world of finance most of my life, there is nothing. I've got a mortgage. I've got a car loan. You might have student loans. We've all had debt. I buy things on a credit card. So to say that on a personal level, debt is an acceptable part of life, but it's not acceptable for football is ludicrous. It's what you do with it that matters. So you're absolutely right. The way that the Glazers acquired Manchester United was via a leverage buyout, where they effectively use the company, which is the target company, as a means of raising funds, and those funds are used to pay off the previous shareholders. Piece of genius from the Glazers. From a business point of view, they probably put 70-80 million pounds into it. They sold a quarter of the club for 1.3 billion. Work of art. The problem was, in 2005, nobody had really heard of the Glazers, and the American markets in which they borrowed that money weren't really quite sure what soccer was either. So therefore they were charging very high rates of interest, which peaked at 16.25%. So since the Glazers acquired Manchester United, they borrowed £700 million and they've spent over £800 million in interest. Now that £800 million, that'll buy you half a stadium. That'll buy you another 12 Anthonys. I was only good. And then if you contrast what Manchester United have done and how much extra money has it generated? Has it generated more ticket sales? No. Because it's gone in, the interest and the loans have gone to service the debt. Has it generated more money elsewhere in improving the facilities? No. Manchester United's infrastructure spend is actually smaller than that of Brentford or Brighton. Tiny clubs. This is absolutely ludicrous. So it's what you do with it. You contrast that with Spurs. Spurs have borrowed more money than Manchester United, but they borrowed that money at 2.5%. And those loans aren't repayable until 2039. And Spurs are paying £25 million a year in interest. £25 million is a lot of money, you might be saying to yourself. But then you go, well, hold on. They're getting an extra £75 million a year in ticket sales. And they're getting an extra £100 million a year through their commercial activities. Beyonce, Coldplay, NFL, boxing, go-karting. They recently signed a contract with Haringey Council, which allows them to have 30 non-football events. So what is Spurs? Spurs is now an entertainment company where the biggest part is the football club in terms of the biggest single part, but the football club is actually less than half of the overall organisation. But it's all of the organisation's revenues which go into your PSR calculation. So what Daniel Levy has done from a business point of view, brilliant. Again, and both he and the Glazers have made a lot of money out of this, and I don't begrudge them from a business perspective. But you guys on this call and me, none of us fell in love with football because of the bottom line. But Spurs are the most profitable club in the history of the Premier League. I can be a little bit cheeky, so I went to my local branch of Timpson's and got a trophy engraved, Premier League's most profitable club. But I sent it down to Spurs because, let's be honest, they've not got a lot in their trophy cabinet, and they didn't even send me a reply.
On that note, I think we'll move on to Liverpool, Cabs. So what would you like to know about Liverpool specifically?
I guess I just wanted to take your view on the comparison, right? So we've got these American owners. I think this is a really interesting insight to kind of on the direction of how to manage a football club or how to own a football club and what levers to utilize, right? You have these two American, essentially private equity fund managers that come in and basically buy clubs. They've got a history of buying of sports franchises. So what do you think Liverpool have done well, or Liverpool's owners have done well, relatively? And I guess on a widest, where do you think they've made any mistakes, if they have?
Well, they've got less resources than Manchester United. They've got less opportunities because they were coming from a point further back, but they have got a much higher quality of management. So what they've done is that they've applied sports science. I've got a book here called It's called How to Win the Premier League. It's
Brilliant.
Yeah. I mentioned in it, by the way. Just thought I'd drop that in. It's by Dr. Ian Graham. I've got to know Ian. I've had a few calls with Ian and Mike Edwards, and those clearly are private calls. But I was impressed by their professionalism, their single-mindedness. They knew exactly what they were doing. They weren't interested in trying to impress people on the internet. They weren't bothered about what the media was saying. And they recruited players based on a specific set of criteria which would improve the team. So what FSG have been very good at is building a successful team. And a successful team is not the same as signing a player because he's good. Because he might be good for Chelsea. He might be good for Brighton. He might be good for Crystal Palace. It doesn't mean that he fits in with the culture of play that you're going to have. And they've also tried to have continuity. So, their recruitment of Klopp was a piece of genius, because you looked at Klopp's record and what's he won? But what they focused on, and this if you read that book, which I would recommend to anybody, it was all about value added. So that has been the focus of Liverpool Football Club. They have signed players, they have signed staff, they have recruited in order to add value both on the pitch and off the pitch. And now that they are reaping the rewards, they're going to win the Premier League this year, unless there's an almighty mess up, and can't see that.
We have to talk about Manchester City briefly. So what's the latest on that case? And how do you see that panning out?
Well, the latest is that the commission hearing, finished in mid-December. I think it took 11 weeks. There's 130 charges, not 115, when you actually lay them out on a charge-by-charge basis. But actually, there's 3. Have Manchester City received money from the owner, which they have pretended to be money from sponsors? Because money from the owner isn't part of your income, money from sponsors is. So have they misrepresented to the Premier League the money that was coming into the club? Secondly, have they been playing players and other members of staff off book? So one of the allegations is Roberto Mancini was on a £2 million a year contract at Manchester City and was receiving £2 million a year for doing 4 days training in Abu Dhabi. The owners are based in Abu Dhabi. Doesn't pass the smell test, but the smell test isn't a legal requirement as far as I'm aware. And also, if Abu Dhabi University wants to pay me £2 million for 4 days of football finance lecturing, I'll take a week of my holiday, and provided I declare it on my tax return, I've done nothing wrong. The third accusation is that Manchester City have not cooperated with the investigation. And on this charge, remember, they were found guilty by the Court for Arbitration for Sport, and they would have had to go and pay a €10 million penalty. Manchester City's defence against that: our computer systems were hacked. Why should we comply? Why should we assist anybody who has obtained evidence against us through criminal means? So that's their defence. Now, that wasn't a defence which stood up when it came to Court for Arbitration for Sport. So that's where we are. What are the punishments going to be? Well, first of all, we've got an arbitration system of innocent until proven otherwise. It will be done on the balance of probabilities as opposed to undeniable evidence. So it's if it's 51-49, then it's found guilty. I think the first charge is the most serious one. The first charge is effectively corporate fraud, and I think the only appropriate penalties would be, given that it covers the period 2009 to 2018, it's got to be a points deduction which A, is seen as a punishment, and B, is seen as a deterrent for anybody else who's considering to do something similar. And therefore, you're probably looking somewhere in the region of 60 to 100 points. I think the off-book things, I think City are quite weak in their defence on that, because they don't know what they have got in their defence is, well, we didn't know that he was going to Abu Dhabi. We thought he was going, he said he was doing a weekend break with his missus. That's what I'd say. But again, we don't know what evidence has been seen. The third one, I think it's difficult for City to get out of the third accusation of non-cooperation, but they didn't get any sporting benefit from those charges. So therefore, in my opinion, and remember, I'm just a teacher, I'm not a lawyer, in my opinion, because they got no sporting benefit, they shouldn't have any sporting sanction. It should be a financial sanction.
Just briefly on the future of football then. So I think maybe the big thing that's coming up potentially this year is the independent regulator. So again, What's the latest, and what impact do you see that having on football as a whole?
Okay, for the sake of complete transparency, I was asked to present to the fan-led review. Don't know why. On the back of that, I was asked to write 2 research papers, effectively state of play documents, which were presented to members of parliament, to civil servants. So that was commissioned by the Department of Digital Culture, Media and Sport. I was not paid for those, I'd like to stress. So if anybody says, Maguire's just lining his pocket, they're wrong. And the state of play is not great. Many clubs are owner dependent upon their existence, but there's many generous owners and there's many people that want to be owners. We're not losing football clubs. The EFL is in favour of the regulator. Why is that? Because they think that they can get a better distribution deal. The Premier League is opposed to the regulator. No, it says it's in favour of the regulator for some things, but not all. And the one issue of dissent and discontent is on should the Premier League provide additional funding to clubs in the EFL, and that's the key issue. I think the Premier League has shot itself in the foot, because the fan-led review came out in 2021. We're now in 2025. So the Premier League's had 3.5 years to go to the EFL and say, currently, you get 16% of the pie. EFL says we want 25%. The league says get stuff. And even the EFL knows deep down that 25% is just made up nonsense. My understanding is sort of 2.5 years ago. I think it was 2.5 years ago when we had somebody called Liz. When Boris Johnson was Prime Minister, the Premier League had put together a deal which was more generous than the current 16%. The EFL had decided amongst themselves, partly because many of the clubs were skint and they needed the money, we'll take it and we will oppose the regulator. It's all a bit of horse trading. And then Boris Johnson's regime fell. It was replaced by the lettuce woman. Well, I can't remember her name now.
Old Liz.
She was part of the Libertarian Looney Brigade, who were opposed to any form of regulation. So therefore, the Premier League took that deal off the table. And I think because they thought that Truss was going to be there for a long time, certainly longer than 6 weeks. And they've not made progress since. I think they've missed a trick. They could have gone back to the EFL with a decent deal where, yes, the EFL is getting a larger slice. It's getting a larger slice of a much bigger pie. So the Premier League still getting 81, 82% of this much larger pie. So its clubs are not losing out. And it's failed to do so. That is the area that both parties are fighting over. I don't want a regulator. I think that we don't have a regulator for rugby. We don't have a regulator for toilet paper. We don't have a regulator for plastic boxes. So why do we need one for football? Well, I mean, part of the reason is that football clubs are monopolies and we need protection from monopolies. And people say, well, hold on, Kieran, there's 92 clubs. That's not a monopoly. There is. You're Manchester United fans. If Manchester United have got a monopoly of your support, Manchester United go bust, what are you going to do? Oh, should we go to the Etihad? Should we go to Anfield? It ain't going to happen, is it? Mm-hmm. So there is no substitute. So therefore, they are local monopolies. And the nature of monopolies is that monopolies abuse their power. And I think we've seen that with the £66 charges for tickets. And they're trying to rinse fans. You look at the price of merchandise, you look at the price of TV subscriptions, and you go, those have risen far faster than general inflation since the start of the Premier League. And that's an abuse of monopoly power. That's one of the things that monopolies do.
So why don't you back the regulator then, just out of interest?
No. Do I want a regulator? No. Do we need a regulator?
Okay.
Unfortunately, I think because of the behaviour of the Premier League, we do need a regulator, because it has failed to see that it does have a broader responsibility towards the game. And I appreciate that if you are the Glazers, let's take the owners of the big clubs. The Glazers, John Henry, Stan Kroenke, Sheikh Mansour, Joe Lewis. Who have I left off? Todd Bowley does turn up, to be fair, but Roman Abramovich didn't used to turn up. I've been to more matches this season than those lot have been over the last 5 years. So therefore, they're not football fans. They don't understand football, and it's their ignorance and some of the... let's face it, 30% of the clubs in the Premier League tried to join the Super League. I don't know whether you've read the details of Project Big Picture, but that involved only allowing 9 clubs in the Premier League to have votes over decisions and only needing 6 out of 9 to carry a decision. Wonder which 6 clubs that might be.
Kieran, can I just jump in for 1 second? Sorry. So just regarding this, specifically this issue, I think I've read a few analyst reports that basically say that the next jump up in income for the Premier League is essentially now tied to the ability to basically sell individual matches or clubs. Do you foresee that to happen in the near future, or is that something that you think is off the table?
I don't think it would work, and the reason for that is that under the Premier League constitution, you need 14 clubs to vote for it. It's not in the interest of it's in the interest of 6 clubs, but it's not in the interest of 14. So I think it's unlikely. But where I do see the next big step up in terms of TV rights is that there will be some form of alternative means of consuming the broadcast package. So I got a Meta Quest 3 for Christmas. My wife didn't know what to get me. I thought, oh, this is a bit of a gadget. You know, this would be up there with my ice cream maker and my bread maker, and the treadmill that I bought during COVID that never gets used. And actually, I'm thinking, wow, this is pretty cool. And I've spoken to people in private equity, and they say, we see this working in 2 ways. Firstly, why do we go to football? Yeah, if you go to Old Trafford, it's a pain in the arse. You got to transport yourself there. The trams and the buses, and you can't get parking. Or if you do get parking, there's some little scally Mancunian kid charging you a £10 for a privilege, or he'll put your windows out. So it's a pain in the arse to get there. The toilets are crap. The view is poor. The catering is absolutely atrocious. It's 2025, for heaven's sake. And then it's going to take you 2.5 hours to get home because everybody leaves at 5 o'clock and there's 75,000 people trying to get out of an area which isn't built for 75,000. So
what about if you go to a good team?
Well, equally, it's not that easy to get out of Anfield or the London clubs, I can assure you. But if I've got a headset where it looks as if I'm sitting in the Stretford end or the Cot or the Shed or wherever it's going to be, football is great because it's communal, because it's shared. So if I now can have a headset where my best mate Dean, who I've been going to football with for 50 years, if I turn my headset that way, Dean's got his headset on, he looks and he thinks he's sitting next to me, and we can have a conversation just like we go, Jesus Christ, he's crap. Referee, yeah, you can have that, because if you can get that shared experience into the household, I think you can then start charging for it. And here's another issue. I was on a panel, been on a couple of panels. I don't know, I get invited to them, mainly because I talk non-stop, as you probably realise. I've been on a couple of panels with people from private equity and people from investment banking. And they say the biggest problem with Manchester United is that you've got 1 billion fans and you've got a capacity of 75,000. What happens if we can increase the capacity to 300,000 or 250,000? I'm going, well, you can't do that in Manchester. It just doesn't work. He says, no, it doesn't. Because what we do, I went to the ABBA Voyage show in London, which is an Avatar-based show.
Yeah.
I paid £160 for a ticket to watch a cartoon. I was in deep trouble with my wife. So, you play the game, boys. You play the game. And it was a great experience. Now, think about the way that we're making improvements with technology. If I've now got a new Old Trafford, 100,000 seater capacity Old Trafford, and embedded into it are 200 camera points, and embedded into the players is wearable tech, so therefore you can effectively replicate that avatar. And you can beam that from Old Trafford up to satellite. One signal goes to Mumbai, another goes to Melbourne, another goes to Moscow, another goes to Miami, and you've got purpose-built stadia there which will hold 12 to 15,000 people. Well, Manchester United can sell out 12,000 in Miami. They can certainly sell out 12,000 in Mumbai. And people will pay $80, $100 because they think they're there. And they've got that shared experience because I'm there watching it and my mate's physically sitting there next to me. And all of a sudden, this is why the Glazers are still at Manchester United, because they've been sold that. And once that technology arrives, the value of Manchester United goes from $5 billion to 15, 20, $30 billion. Because you still...
So how far away do you think we are away from that?
I think we're 8 to 10 years away.
That's it.
Does
Well,
does the 3 p.m. rule about it not being televised come into this? Can you see that getting abolished to open up?
That's it's just a case of when. not
Exactly.
if.
So that's going to open up revenues. Whether that's look, I know like everyone's getting excited about the future and like headsets and stuff, but like even just being able to stream it, you know, we saw the deal with Amazon. You know, I know that they've not got a future deal, but like if they get rid of the 3 p.m. rule and then you open up that broadcast revenue, even if it is streaming, that surely is going to unlock huge revenue potential.
You've got to be careful, because it's no point you having a 4/5 full stadium because you've got more people. So yeah, provided it's done the right way.
Correctly, yeah.
I think what the Premier League have done, and again, I think they deserve a lot of credit for this, they have created a degree of scarcity. You can have too much football on television.
Yeah.
Doesn't matter who you support. You've got to be careful. We had every single football match taking place during COVID. And it was on every night, because I know people that work in drama, I know people that work in comedy, they couldn't go into studios. So football was your news show, and you had football, and the rest of the time was repeats. Football kept the country going for that 18 months. Otherwise there would have been riots on the streets.
They trialled the pay-per-view as well, and that went terribly.
Well, that was disaster.
Yeah. You know, that's a fair point, and I know we need to wrap up here. So I think the only point I do want to make is around ticket pricing, because as you mentioned, I think the quality of the Premier League product is based on the fans, the full stadiums, the atmosphere. So like you said, we have to be careful if you get rid of that rule and, you know, you lose the fan attendance. So don't you think one thing, if, for example, the 3 p.m. rule goes and, you know, they unlock more revenue, ticket pricing, surely we have to protect ticket pricing in this country and ensure that football tickets are affordable for the working class fans that built this game up, right? Would you agree with that?
Agree with you as a football romantic, as a football legacy fan, as a finance person, as an economist. If Manchester United can sell every ticket for £120, why are they selling them for 50? Because that's economics 101.
Of course.
Brighton, you know, I don't talk too much about my club. Brighton played at Anfield in October. And I've got to be honest, for the first 45 minutes, we played them off the park. And we were facing the Kop. And in the second half, we thought, well, if we carry this on, this is one of the best performances I've ever seen. In the second half, the Kop turned the match around. They effectively said to those players, "You've been outplayed by Brighton. Who the hell do you think you are? Get your arse into gear." But it wasn't the Kenny Dalglish stand. It wasn't the other stands. It wasn't the main stand. It was the Kop. And as you rightly said, it was the people who built that football club emotionally, just like the boys and girls who built the Stretford End or the Kipax or the Clock End or the Shed. Unfortunately, those fans are getting older. Those fans don't spend enough money. Those fans are becoming seniors, and therefore they're expecting discounts in clubs. We've already seen with West Ham and Spurs, they don't want to give them the discounts because they want to replace them with tourists. Because tourists will pay, A, they'll pay tourist prices for tickets. B, they'll spend more money in the megastore. C, they'll buy a program. D, they'll buy they will pay for the catering product, because the legacy fan will go to the same restaurant or the same pub or the same meeting place that they've been going to for the last 40 years. And it's not on the club premises, because, as I said earlier, the catering at Old Trafford is crap.
Yep.
One thing I'd say on that, just quickly, is you don't have to be a romantic. You can be also in the world of finance. You mentioned the monopoly relationships. If you believe in fan equity and you believe in the monopoly relationship, you could make the argument that a football attendance is similar to me and, you know, my electricity bill, which is also a rip-off, and other essential commodities, right? So there is an argument within finance to say there should be a cap. If you agree on the monopoly relationship.
Yeah, and that then comes down to the relationship between stakeholder groups. What fans can do is that collectively they can organise themselves, but we're pretty rubbish at it. I mean, the only time we did come together was during Super League, and I am so proud of you Manchester United fans, and I'll even say Chelsea fans and Arsenal fans, who said, we are the biggest beneficiaries of Super League because we don't have to win matches domestically to be guaranteed participation in this tournament. But we feel that as Chelsea fans, as Manchester United fans, even though it's not an equal playing field, we still have to get up our arses on Saturday on 3 o'clock and win enough matches to deserve to qualify. And I think that was absolutely fantastic by football fans. And you've got to also give a huge amount of credit to Jamie Carragher and Gary Neville, because they acted as the shop stewards. You know, we were the shop floor, they were the shop stewards.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's the perfect place to end. We need to bring the football fans together and ensure that we protect the game. So I'll see what I can do, Kieran. I know some fans from quite a few clubs. So yeah, I think perfect place to wrap up. We're really grateful for you joining this podcast.
It was a long 30 minutes, wasn't it?
It was, yes. So thanks for listening to this episode.